only one World Responsible Tourism Day event after this, which is the session at 2 o'clock, which my colleague Simon Woodward is running on responsible tourism and World Heritage Sites, essentially managing the pressure that there now is on World Heritage Sites. Can we start? This session is in fact being recorded as a webinar. It will be available on YouTube. Somehow or other we'll make sure that you know where it is. So I'm going to, I've asked the speakers to try to restrict themselves to about 8 minutes. I'm quite happy for them to go to about 10, given that this will have a life beyond what happens in this room, and I don't want to lose the integrity of the presentations that they're making. We've got 4 very good and very different presentations. I think you'll enjoy listening to them. I think you'll probably learn a lot from them, and I certainly hope that the fact that it'll be available on the web will make it accessible as teaching material and to people around the world. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Rachel McCaffrey to come and talk from Virgin Holidays about securing commercial advantage from responsible tourism. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Nice to get a round of applause. So I manage sustainability for Virgin Holidays Cruises, Bales Worldwide, HIP Hotels and Travel City Direct brands. And I'm here today representing the tour operating arm of the Virgin Group. Virgin Atlantic, the airline, is effectively a separate company, so they have their own communications and sustainability teams. So I'm really just here speaking to you on behalf of the tour operator, Virgin Holidays. And for the last 4 or 5 years at Virgin Holidays, we've been working hard to communicate sustainability, to let our customers know what we're doing, partly because we're quite proud of it, but also, yes, you know, it certainly is getting a more competitive arena, so there is advantage there. And I think it won't be a surprise to hear that communicating sustainability activity is a challenge, and we certainly wouldn't claim to have cracked it. But I've learnt some basics that I feel probably worth sharing over the years, and I wanted to take you through those using some examples from wider industry, as well as some of the stuff that we're doing at Virgin. I'm guessing the fact that you're here means that you recognise that there is some potential market value in all things green, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but I did think it was worth saying something about potential trends. There's certainly been a cultural shift in the last few years, last 10 years. It is now seen as being cool to care. For obvious reasons, that's been comparatively slow to trickle into the ticket items like cars and holidays, but survey after survey is showing, and the September 2011 Travel Weekly survey being the most recent, where 58% of consumers were concerned about sustainability issues on holiday. And awareness of social and environmental impacts are only likely to have increased with the recent mainstream TV coverage presented in a way that was really accessible to the mainstream. This increased awareness in environmental and social issues, particularly around food provenance and fair trade, is really affecting what consumers want from a holiday. There's also this perceived link between quality and sustainability. If it's locally grown or organic, then somehow it must be better. But what we're finding is that in a recession, people actually just want more for their money. They want an authentic experience and a holiday that gives something back, as well as sun, sea and sand. And as the increasing range of sales channels here shows, those organisations selling holidays, even mainstream holidays, are increasingly aiming to cater to this demand. So, how do you do it? How do you convey what your business is doing in a way that makes you stand out from your competitors and makes people sit up and take notice? Sustainability and responsible tourism are complicated concepts. It's very easy to overestimate knowledge and understanding if you are genuinely making your business more sustainable, then you're doing a whole host of things, from cutting down on packaging to, I don't know, maybe introducing reed bed filtration systems to supporting charity efforts in the local community. Your customers aren't going to be able to take all that information in, so you really have to pare down your messaging to the key points that you want to convey. Make it simple so that people can get it, so that it sticks in their minds. And here's an example with Zippo of a company that's leveraging its environmental advantage in just a very simple and clear way. The next point is really about keeping it relevant. Remember to make sure that your messaging to customers or consumers on sustainability is relevant to your business, to your brand, and to your customers. So at Virgin Holidays, we chose to focus communications around helping youth shine, our community investment initiatives. And this is because it's a clear, easy message to understand. Virgin is a young, dynamic brand, hence the focus on youth. It's also a brand that's about, it's associated with entrepreneurship, it's about doing things for yourself. So it's about empowering young people to be the best they can be. Our customers aren't all young, but they are people who identify with the youthfulness of the Virgin brand, the quirkiness. So, it's the kind of thing that they'd expect us to be doing. We're a holiday company, so enabling people to shine is a nice fit too. To be credible, it's really important that you don't miss the elephant in the room. This might be less of an issue in tourism, simply because of the sheer range of issues in responsible tourism. It's so broad, but it's worth bearing in mind. So if the biggest sustainability issue in your destination perhaps is something like water scarcity, then probably your sustainability activity should be focused around water, and so should your communications. Here's an example with Stella of a company that really is doing lots of good stuff, but it doesn't really address the issues the issues that are associated with the product it sells, with alcohol. So, for us as consumers, it's good, but it's planting hedges in the English countryside, different kind of bottles, good, but kind of bit baffling, bit confusing. To stand out, it really helps to think outside the box and do things differently. There's a great example of this from mobile phone operator Orange. With its RockCore program, Orange encourages customers to volunteer time for good causes, and it rewards them with tickets to exclusive events in exchange. It's a really simple concept. It's really effective, it's different, it stands out, and incredibly brand relevant, so very successful. And they have had great publicity for this campaign. The publicity opportunities are endless. Look, they've got celebrities there getting involved in the volunteering. They also had, with their the first concert they held, had a big singer come over from the States, and there were visa entry issues because he had a criminal past, I think. But really got all the radio stations and loads of media coverage about why RockCore was getting this artist over, and what the volunteering was all about. Great publicity. It's also important to be honest and not try and greenwash or overclaim. So this advert here for Waitrose pork attracted a lot of negative publicity because from the picture there, you can see it insinuated that the pigs have slightly happier lives than they actually do. The what's in it for me is also really important, particularly at the moment. It's just not enough just to be green. Consumers, as I said, are really prioritising value for money above everything else. So the product does really have to be strong and stand up on its own. The green element is, essentially the added value that allows you to differentiate. So for us, it didn't make sense to put together a collection of green hotels, just eco-certified hotels or whatever. We put together a collection of fantastic experiential holidays with this human nature collection here. And as an added benefit to that, these holidays give something back to people in destinations and have an environmental benefit. It's also really important to demonstrate a long-term commitment, as Marks and Spencer have shown very effectively. This isn't an ad campaign or a one-off. To be seen as credible by consumers like Marks and Spencer's here, you have to show that you're in this for the long haul. You can't be just a flash in the pan or just be, putting it into your communications when you think it's a bit cool and trendy and people are talking about it at the moment. To be credible, it has to be long-term. And finally, it's important to join the dots and to not say one thing and do another. And I think towel reuse schemes are a really good example of this. I travel quite a lot. I've been to a lot of different hotels. It doesn't matter how green the hotel seems to be, whether you dump your towels on the floor or hang them up like the little card asks you to, they seem to always get changed by the chambermaid. So in many cases, it's just going to be an issue of training staff, so that the messaging is consistent in words and actions as well. Okay, so just run through the points in summary. Keep things simple. Stay relevant to your brand, your business and your customers. Address the key issues with your product. Use imagination, do something different. Be honest. Remember the what's in it for me. Demonstrate commitment and be consistent. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much indeed. I'd like to ask Xavier Font, my colleague from Leeds Met, and my colleague in the International Centre for Responsible Tourism, to present next. The title does look a little odd in this series, but Xavier is going to actually present some research that he's been involved in doing recently, which I think pertains very much to today's discussion. So Xavier.
Okay. I want to bring back the issue that actually, if we put in perspective the different forms of travel that there are, the business travel is more than 50% of all global travel, and we seem to be focusing far too often just on leisure travel. And it seems to me that if we are actually going to move the industry forward, we need to be looking at a variety of areas. And what I basically want to look at is how we can secure this commercial advantage in different ways for the business-to-business market or for the business-to-consumer market, and the messages we'll send out and the way in which we'll communicate a lot of these messages will inevitably have to be rather different. Most of what we're still telling customers about on our sustainability practices to the outside world is shouting out about our philanthropy, about eco-efficiencies, about carbon, about the number of jobs we've created, about the staff welfare. We're very good at saying the amount of money that's coming to London because of Excel existing here is £1.6 billion a year. But then when Excel develops a sustainability management plan, they only manage the impacts that happen within their building. They don't manage any of the impacts related to generating 1.6 billion, to the local economy, or any of the impacts that relate to, elsewhere. So we tend to ignore quite often all the issues about destination leakages, about, not really building capacity building, not necessarily looking at market access, not really resource protection, biodiversity, and so on. The way in which a lot of these businesses are doing work on corporate social responsibility and the way in which they're looking for that commercial advantage is rather different. And the large businesses, we basically come across much more data that says it's all about reputation and brand image. It's about, looking at this kind of internal pressure on business managers, pressure from investors, consumers. It's interesting to see how a particular hotel group, and I won't mention it, but they said to me recently, because of my experience in sustainability certification, we've just lost 3 contracts of long-standing clients that we had because they've now asked us for sustainability standards as part of request for prices. We couldn't do it, they've switched. So what we're hearing a lot is that in the meetings, conferences, convention industry, retaining the customers you already have may work when you don't have CSR practices, but most of the clients are looking for switching. One of the reasons why they're looking for that switch is they've brought in now sustainability purchasing guidelines as part of the supply chain management, and then they've done all they could do in the mainstream supply chain of producing cars or producing whatever their main business is. And now when they're looking at greening the supply chain beyond that, they're coming in with particular standards saying all of our suppliers need to be ISO 14000 certified or BS 8901 certified or whatever else. And it seems to be coming in as a surprise to much of this industry that this is going to take place. In terms of stakeholders and who matters, in the research we're doing in Leeds Metropolitan University for MPI, Meetings and Professionals International, we're basically finding that companies are saying, I will change most rapidly my CSR practice. I'll start to formalize those practices if my buyers are asking for it, if my competitors are getting ahead of me, if my industry association is telling me I should do it. The least likely reasons for me to do it will be if government is asking me to do it, or trade union suppliers. The difference there only came when government basically is actually taxating some of the issues about sustainability, but then they kind of club that together not as in government reasons, but in terms of financial reasons. And most really of what we're still doing in the conferencing, meetings, conventions industry is about cost reduction. It's very interesting to see that most of it is about building management, managing your facilities, and it is all cost reduction. We're still looking at the water, waste, energy sort of issues. The drivers really that are making much of this industry change what they're doing and what they're telling us that will make their businesses change most in the conferencing, meetings and business travel is going to be a much greater demand for climate change data. Okay, not necessarily the fact that we acknowledge that there are finite resources, but that we're going to be put under pressure for doing something about those. Kilowatt prices 5 years ago were 7 pence, they're now 14 pence. We will be looking at increase of 40% in energy cost in the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, all of these things are going to make a massive difference. But also the fact that there's a massive opportunity for reducing operating costs, coupled with the fact that there is much more demand for that data to be provided, and that data can be measured relatively easily, is going to make a big difference here. In terms of CSR drivers and demand for it, obviously it's going to be then linked to funding and cost of materials, but the fact that it's going to be required as part of our supply chain management, the fact that in terms of education and training we have massive opportunities to do some of this. We saw data already being published of Hilton Europe saying they saved $30 million on water, waste and energy management over the last 3 years. Interestingly, what they said is 17 of those $30 million were the change of staff behavior. It required no actual physical investment. It just meant telling staff not only do it, but providing them some sort of incentive to do it. Okay? What is a real shame is that none of those 30 million have been ring-fenced as a CSR budget, but that's a different conversation altogether. And there's going to be much more of a driver towards saying, the commercial advantage comes from doing CSR properly, moving it beyond being a gimmick, actually institutionalizing and making CSR much more part of the DNA of the company. We've gone as far as, well, the experts basically that we've been interviewing for this study say we've gone as far as we possibly can with doing things by tinkering around the edges. And for us to do something else now, we need to go beyond the eco-savings, and we need to go beyond the kind of a qualitative information about having created some jobs for some local community people and so on. We actually need to be able to provide much more hard data around some of this. The adoption of international standards is going to be one of the main issues around this. You've seen the changes on BS 8901, the Sustainable Tourism Standards for the events industry in the UK. Basically, it's a requirement now to be a supplier to the Olympics. Interestingly, the process of going from BS 8901 to an ISO standard for events management from a national to international standard has been the single quickest process that there has been for any standard to go through that process. Brazil's been very involved in the design of the international standard, but also just yesterday the Convention Industry Council from the United States announced new environmental sustainable meeting standards to be applied across the United States for 9 different subsectors of the conferencing and conventions industry. The problems that we have had in the tourism industry of now over 140 standards being created for sustainable tourism do not exist in the events industry, partly because they benefited from coming into this much later on, and therefore being able to streamline and go much more directly towards standardized international standards with all the weaknesses as well as all the benefits that there could be to that. So the key drivers are going to be much more around finding new ways of integrating and doing best practice, looking after the well-being of staff and benchmarking beyond environmental issues and taking sustainability impacts much more seriously. I just want to finish by saying that our group at Leeds Metropolitan University, that Harold and I are working, have been commissioned by MPI, Meetings and Professionals International, to conduct a 3-year study on the difference that corporate social responsibility is going to make, or is currently making, to the business model of the conference, meetings and hospitality industry. We are serving over 20,000 meetings industry organizers across the world in the next month on what it means to their business. We are then serving an equally large number of buyers of conferencing facilities and conference venues to see how, at a corporate level, the requirements of what we expect from a conference organizer is changing. And then we're going to these meetings industry venues and we're offering them to have surveys basically created for them to use with their delegates to see what is the experiential part of sustainability within that venue, and then we can provide a certain amount of comparison. A lot of this data is going to be available over the next 3 or 4 months. We'll be measuring what are the drivers for doing this, what are the practices, how do they manage it and measure it, and particularly how do they market it and communicate it, because it seems to me that the way in which we market it is going to be rather different when this message in the main for this sector is going to go on a business-to-business marketing, not a business-to-consumer, and therefore quite different to some of the examples that Rachel McCaffrey was just using now. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Xavier. I want to turn next to Justin Francis, who's one of our alumni from the International Centre for Responsible Tourism, but much better known as the Managing Director of ResponsibleTravel.com. And Justin is perhaps one of the first practitioners in using the principles of responsible tourism for marketing responsible travel. So Justin, we're looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you, Harold. Hello everyone. This is ResponsibleTravel.com. It's 10 years old as a business. I believe it was the first, if not one of the very first businesses dedicated to marketing responsible tourism. In fact, I think one of the first businesses to use the term responsible tourism. We market tours and accommodations. We market tours from about 350 different tour companies and 1,000 more accommodations, all of which are screened for criteria against responsible tourism. Often very small, very specialist, but also some bigger, more established businesses, including some excellent TUI companies, for example, who are really great at responsible tourism. Just in numbers, this year, our 10th year, we celebrated our $100 million worth of bookings through the site. We're getting up towards now actually 700,000 booking inquiries. We get 350,000 visitors per month. We have a database of clients who've booked or inquired of 150,000. And as many of you will know who were here yesterday, we run the Virgin Holidays Responsible Tourism Awards. And if you're looking for some of the best examples of cutting-edge responsible tourism, then check out the magazine and the app for the Responsible Tourism Awards. These numbers are small scale in the terms of the biggest players in our industry, but equally they're not tiny. Our business is one that's grown organically with really rather tiny investment, and I hope it lends some credence to the ideas that I'm going to put forward about the marketing advantages of responsible tourism, in a sense that the bookings show that there is some interest. But firstly, in terms of the context, what I believe we're seeing in the market is a polarization. And this polarization exists on the one hand between security, luxury and convenience on one hand, on the other hand freedom and independence and authenticity. And this is something that Mintel in their recent Oxygen report also picked up on. Tom Savagar at the Future Laboratory said it slightly differently. We're seeing a generation of travellers who are keen on exploration and testing goals that are physical, emotional, spiritual and intellectual. Travel is moving away from simply being a process where you tick off lists of things to see and do. It's becoming about fulfillment, relaxation, rejuvenation, spirituality and adventure. And this is a big shift. If we look at the market, if we look at the package holiday market share, then you see a very striking story. From a historic high of 90% of the market, you see a very strong decline. Even in the 6 years from 2003 to 2009, you saw a decline from 47% of the market share to 38%. In fact, if you look at package holidays, the sales have remained pretty much consistent, but the growth has all come from elsewhere. And the growth has come from the tourism niches and from do-it-yourself DIY travel. And to me, this is now redefining the mainstream. The mainstream is now about people organising their own holidays and about the tourism niches. These tourism niches, from wildlife to spa to skiing to adventure to walking, are individually small, but collectively they are becoming increasingly big and important. This is not to say that all types of package holiday are in decline. There are some subsets of this which are doing quite well, but the general trend is clear to see. What's also changing is that experience for money is becoming as important as value for money. EFM is becoming as important as VFM. In the economic climate that we're in now, people have less to spend, but that doesn't mean they're just looking for cheap. What they're looking for is they're still looking for an experience. We live in an experience economy. They want the biggest experience for the money that they can afford. And we're also seeing experience inflation. So what seemed like a big experience for a family 10 years ago is not a big experience now. So the family who went to a resort in Spain are now wondering about kayaking or about pony trekking or other adventures. And I think that experience inflation will just go on and continue. Robert Macfarlane, who's a writer who I very much like, described the atmosphere, the feeling in the world now, as being something akin to the post-Second World War atmosphere, where we're seeing selective austerity, deferred desire and earned pleasure, and a yearning for sustainability and connection and contact. So I will have everything now, I deserve everything now, feeling of 5-10 years ago has gone. People will scrimp on parts of their life to afford the things that they really feel are important to them. It also means that big holiday might not be taken every year, it might be taken every other year, which is, of course, impacting the tourism industry. In terms of marketing, the backstory of products is becoming increasingly important. You see this across all sectors of different categories within the world. So the question is, who made this product? Under what conditions did they make it? And with what consequences to the environment and local communities? And we see marketeers exploiting that. And what they're essentially doing is reconnecting the people who buy things with the people who make them. And what's happened with global trade, with so many intermediaries, is that sense of connection has been lost. So think of a farmer's market where you walk up to the farmer and you look him in the eye, he's growing the potatoes, you buy the potatoes from him. Direct contact. Think of the supermarkets, think of all the labelling of all the products. On the front you see the details of the product, on the back you see the story of the farmer or the community that produced it or grew it. This is a big trend in marketing. It's something important for us to understand in tourism. Here's Whole Foods in the US, in New York, just as an example. They use some of the most prominent merchandising space to tell the backstory of the product and who grew it and under what conditions. We do the same at responsibletravel.com. We have a new part to the site where essentially on every page we tell the personal human life story of the person behind that tour company. We make that very personal connection. So for me, responsible tourism is about creating better places to live in and better places to visit, but it's more than that. It's about authentic experiences. And if there's one point I wanted to leave behind, it's this inextricable link between authenticity and responsibility. See, I don't believe it's possible to deliver a truly authentic experience without really treating the local communities fairly and properly. I think you will fail in your efforts to deliver authenticity without that. Authenticity is a much used term. It's very hard to get right. It's very easy to tip over into something which is exploitative or derogatory, but I think the businesses who do it best are the businesses who really practice responsible tourism most strongly. So my understanding is about authentic experiences and better places to live in and better places to visit. And when I talk about authenticity, I don't just mean the remote community in the rainforest or the community-based tourism. You know, I think there's a great opportunity being taken by some of the bigger, more mainstream tour operators within their excursions program to offer their guests something which is, for part of their holiday, a little bit more real and a little bit authentic. So authenticity is a trend that all of us, I think, in the industry who practice responsible tourism can take advantage of. Authenticity is about truthfulness, it's about originality and being genuine and being sincere, and about being real. And it stands in quite stark comparison to more commodity tourism or more undifferentiated tourism, in which case, sadly, our industry, we see culture being changed and packaged for tourist consumption, sometimes with the consequence that the original meaning to local people of that cultural activity is lost. And I think destinations that practice that and start to see themselves through the eyes of tourists essentially become lost. I think also that in terms of undifferentiated commodity tourism, there is a race to the bottom in terms of price. And that's because there's been an absolute game changer in tourism in the last 5-10 years. And that's this, is that the tourist is now totally empowered through the internet to find the cheapest product. If you are the cheapest product in your sector and you have margin to compete, you will make a fortune. If you are the second or third cheapest product, you will be found out in seconds via meta crawler sites, meta search sites, online travel agent sites. And more recently, it's going to change everything. Google's Hotel Finder and Flight Finder, which will show live availability, will mean the tourist, in the blink of an eye, can find the cheapest product. If you're not differentiated in some shape or form, it's a race to the bottom in terms of price. I want to talk about how responsible tourism is designed. You know, I believe that it's part of a co-creation process, essentially. It's designed as part of a conversation with local people and communities and government around their ideas, their ways of life, utilising their guides, utilising the traditions and rituals, and doing so in a fair way. And that is why, of course, responsible tourism produces a more authentic experience. And the benefit to the tourist is clear. Rather than a brief stay somewhere, they get to enjoy it as much, if you like, as the locals do, and through their eyes. And that's something which tourists increasingly crave. So in summary, responsible tourism meets all of the marketing trends for deeper experiences. It tells the backstory, reconnects consumers with destinations and local people. It's authentic, and of course it's sustainable. So responsible tourism is bang on trend, but I'll leave you just with this thought. People do not buy responsible tourism based primarily on the ethics. I've yet to have one business come to me, I think Xavier's used this in the previous presentation, and say, please find me a composting toilet and I'll book that property. It never ever happens. They book it because of the experience, and they book it because of the quest for authenticity. But where does that authenticity comes from? That authenticity comes from businesses that practice responsible tourism. So market the experiences, but do so based on practices of responsible tourism. So that's where I'd like to leave it. You can contact me here or via LinkedIn. And if I may, just one brief advert for the company. We're now offering a service to market accommodations for free through responsibletravel.com. No commission, no fee of any kind. So if you know of any property that's good at responsible tourism that needs the support for free, then please contact us. Many thanks.
Thanks very much indeed, Justin. Going to switch now to Christian Cull from TUI. So we're going from a very small company to a very large one. It'll be interesting, I think, when we get to the questions, to get some discussion going about the differences between the two approaches. But Christian Cull, who's Communications Director for TUI UK and Ireland, would like to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you. That was actually a very useful introduction, actually. Apologies for the croakiness, by the way. because I think I agree with everything Justin just said. What I'm going to try and do is demonstrate that with scale comes challenge. That's not to ask for anybody's sympathy here by any means, but it's to demonstrate a recognition that we do have within TUI that we can't really keep it simple. Because if we keep it simple and focus on one element of the journey, from deciding where you want to go on holiday to getting there and coming back again, then the outside world will quite rightly ask and expect us to tell them about every other step of that journey, which is what we do. As a marketeer and a PR guy, I'd quite like to be able to focus on one element or another and zoom in. And on occasions we do. We talk about the biofuels work that we're doing. But as soon as we do, understandably again, people want to know every detail about everything else and every other flight we're operating. And when you're operating the third largest airline in the UK, then again it's incumbent on you to be able to have that transparency. So I would argue that you need the authenticity that Justin spoke about without doubt, but you need to be authentic to your brand and to your customers as well. And there is a difference in the way mainstream customers might think and behave. And actually it's probably a more positive set of behaviours than perhaps might be first given credit to them when they are on holiday. For example, I'll raise all-inclusives now, although there's not much in the presentation here on all-inclusives. People who go on all-inclusives with First Choice and Thomson, you actually go on more excursions than those who don't go on all-inclusives with us. So it's quite a complicated situation. What I also don't want you to think for 1 second is that we believe in any way we have all the answers. Just so this is not a creds presentation, I promise you, but I'm going to demonstrate the detail. I understand another tour operator released their 20 commitments for 2020 yesterday. I haven't generally had a chance to see the detail yet, but we're 1 year into our 3-year commitments, and I do want to outline and give you a demonstration of the fact that we think every step of the journey is very important. That's TUI Travel PLC. As Harold said, we are on the large side. As an ex-marketing director of Waitrose, by the way, I was a bit surprised to see that Heston Blumenthal ad, and I don't want to comment necessarily on that because I don't know the detail of it. But when I was there, we always felt that we were doing the Waitrose job against Tesco. So yes, you could keep it simpler and use example by example. You can't necessarily do that when you're, if you like, the travel equivalent of Tesco, as we possibly are. And that's our structure. So I'm not here to talk on behalf of all of it. I'm here to talk about First Choice and Thomson, which is about 40% of the overall PLC business. And we do operate in nearly 90 destinations. We take 5.5 million a year. So while it's flat, as Justin said, we haven't seen a decline in numbers. We've seen an adjustment in holidays chosen perhaps, and durations, and indeed destinations. And another word that Justin mentioned was differentiation. We're very much focused on product differentiation at the moment, because we feel that that actually helps set us apart and demonstrates what we can bring that others may not be able to bring, and do indeed do that to scale. But we do that on a local level. We have 5,000 contracts with hotels. Each of those is negotiated individually, so we work with 5,000 different bases, and we have to recognise, and indeed do recognise, the need to be flexible and recognise that each of those 5,000 contracts represents a whole range of different locations, and we need to be sensitive to the needs of each of those locations. And this is our vision, which I think has just been cut off, but we want to be lighter on the environment. We do want to celebrate local culture, and we do manage to do that even in large-scale hotels. As I say, people do go out and about, perhaps more than they're given credit for. And we want to enhance livelihoods, and indeed we do, because we do work with local suppliers. Our ODI analysis work recently on Saragurmi, for example, which is a very high-profile, large hotel in our First Choice portfolio, demonstrated that 90% of the money going into that hotel went directly back into local and Turkish suppliers. We do have 3-year commitments, as I said. I think it's difficult to measure really beyond that. We have to stand up and be accountable to them, for them as well, rather. It's difficult for us to plan as a business beyond 3 years, and we don't. We have sort of longer term strategies, but the detail then gets developed as we move on. But we work on a 3-year basis. And we divide that down into 4 sections, really. One is to reduce our carbon footprint. We do operate in Thomson Airways. If it's not the lowest carbon producing airline, it's first equal But again, we find it frustrating because sometimes other airlines aren't necessarily as forthcoming in terms of detail. It would be good to get a consistency of transparency that would enable the communication challenge that we quite rightly face. But we will reduce the carbon emissions from TUI Travel Airlines. We want to get the Dreamliner. We do want to increase the level of biofuels that we're using. Anyone who, by the way, who thinks that we're going to ever use palm oil and soya oil, as sometimes gets reported, please let me reassure you we won't. And we're going to reduce the carbon emissions from our IT operations, for example. And it's that sort of indication that's helped us stand in the top 5th of the carbon league that was produced only earlier this week. Because what we're trying to reinforce to people within our business, again to Xavier's point about sustainability being part of the DNA, we can't produce or market a message about sustainability in detail or in one particular area of our business without it running through that business. There's no credibility if you can't actually recognise what our colleagues in the shops are saying to us and the general demand that they have for further information from us. That has to come first. And I think that's a really important point to note, that when you are, as I say, taking 5 million people, you're operating 800 odd shops, you've got 40% of your business online, so it's a complex model. You've got the airline on top of that as well, and you're working in partnership with hotels. You need to get the detail right. You don't just get everything perfect, because nothing ever will be perfect, but you need to really give yourself a thoroughness of scrutiny before you allow yourself to talk about it in the outside world. Otherwise, quite rightly, you get torn apart. I think it's worth saying that the temptation perhaps to focus on one element of the business is something we do try and rein in for the integrity of the whole programme. We do live our values. We've been going through a journey ourselves as a business. We only merged Thomson First Choice 4 years ago, which sounds like a long time, but when it was a merger of the scale, it was the largest in the UK in 4 years ago. You then had to concentrate on culture within a business and bringing them together. So it's only relatively more recently, we must admit, that we've engaged with our colleagues to encourage them to be more proactive within their local communities and to enable them to actually make a difference on a local level and indeed on a personal level. So we've launched things like Project Discovery, which allows everybody to go off and spend time out of their work week as part of their work week on whatever local good cause they would wish to make. And so we're actually admittedly at early stages with that, and we need to do more of it. And we do want to inspire our customers as well. It's interesting to hear about what the direct link is between a customer expressing a belief in a certain type of holiday and then transferring that to their actual behaviour. Going back again to my supermarket days, you'd often stand, even outside Waitrose, outside a supermarket and ask people what they were going to buy, and they'd always tell you it was organic food and fresh meat and fish, and then you might want to get one of your colleagues to ask them on the way out, and you'd be amazed that that wasn't necessarily all they bought or even what they bought at all. So there is a distinction between an intention and obviously and the ultimate behaviour, and we as a business need to guard against overuse of that data. What we can say then is that the correlation exists between, and we take 500,000 feedback forms from our passengers every year, and we look at 60 or 70 questions. They're very patient with us to answer all these questions. And the fifth highest that correlates with overall satisfaction on holiday is their impression about whether or not the holiday that they had was a sustainable one as they understand it or not. That's high. It's a correlation though. So I wouldn't necessarily want to claim more than that, and we do resist doing so. But we do listen to our customers. I mean, 83, and a lot of this is saying to us, do you know what, yes, we are decent, ordinary people. We don't want to burn the planet. It's our planet, it's our kids' planet. They're very family-minded, most of our customers. But they don't necessarily want to think about it every day while they're on holiday. They do want to go out and discover the local areas, but they don't necessarily themselves expect that the behaviour change on holiday has to come from them. And why should it? It should come from the hoteliers who build the hotels and run them, and it should come from the tour operators and the airlines who get them there and back. So they expect us to do the right thing within a business. They expect us to encourage our hotels through guidelines we issue to operate their businesses on a more sustainable basis by looking at the basics, the water, the electricity, the utilities within hotels, just as we do within our shops. None of that's rocket science, but it's detail, it's unglamorous detail. Transferring that to customer messages isn't even something we necessarily want to do, but it's there for them to come and scrutinise should they wish to. And they do increasingly want to go on holiday in hotels that are notable for the way they stand out on a sustainable basis. I think Thomas Cook have committed to 1,500 joining Travel Life by 2020, which is great news, and that's to be applauded. We think we'll get there by about 2014, which is good news as well, but then we need to work on the others. As I say, we're about 5,000 hotels in total. But we have publicly declared that we're working on that, and we do that again just to demonstrate the scale of this, contract by contract, and you have to do it hotel by hotel. And we also encourage customers to contribute as well themselves when buying a holiday. And the EFM VFM equation you were talking about is fascinating. The price elasticity, I'm probably teaching a lot of people to suck eggs here, but it's incredibly challenging asking people to add £1 to a hotel, to a holiday. They might be spending £600-700. To add that extra £1 is something that we're getting increasingly better and more comfortable at asking people to do, face to face or online. But it's interesting just what a challenge that might be. So it's something that's there. It's something that is to have said quite rightly, is a growing expectation from customers and a willingness for them to contribute. But we're a long, long way from where collectively we probably would want to be as a society. And then we go right into micro levels. I could talk about education programs. We do education programs. We do relatively modest education programs, so we don't go out across 20,000 odd schools. We want to build, but we're in early days on this as well. But the impact we have is very, very positive. You have to be very careful, of course, with branding, but I think that education programs are important, as long as then the link is fostered between getting children to bring their enthusiasm across their parents. But the authenticity again and the detail of the materials you produce is fundamentally important. I talked about how customers expect others really to do the work for them. That's a bit simplistic, but is the general overriding challenge we have. Or perhaps put a better way, they rightly expect us to do the right thing. They do want us to help them get out and about. We're working on excursions on a location by location basis that takes people out to experience the local communities, experience taste, touch, smell what local suppliers produce for themselves in a way perhaps that traditional holiday companies might not have done in the past. It's early days, we could do more of it, but we are starting to do that, and we're encouraged by the uptake on it. Conscious of time. So in a nutshell, Holidays Forever is 20 detailed commitments. Without them, we could not go out and make any communication or marketing claim to our customers or the broader market, or to with any credibility, given the fact that obviously we're there to be scrutinised. With them, it makes it difficult to hone in on any particular angle of what we're up to, which is the challenge. But we'd rather do it that way round and actually take ourselves on a journey and get savvier at communicating and marketing what we do, than try and do a few things well and pretend the rest doesn't exist. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Christian. What's been interesting about listening to the three presentations from the companies is that you've all been talking about that critical issue of taking responsibility on behalf of the consumer for increasing sustainability in order to provide those authentic experiences that we know the consumer wants. We've got 12 minutes for some questions. Who'd like to go first?